Hey guys, this is the Infernoman, and we do budget, jank, fun, and Magic the Gathering Arena. Now, before we get into it, if you like the content that I put out there, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit me up with a like, or even better, subscribe to me. It really does show people that they care about what I do. If you have any questions, comments, stuff you'd like to see discussed, or if you want to talk to me directly, you can @ me on Twitter or chat directly with me as I do stream 2 to 3 times a week on Twitch. Sometimes it's Magic, sometimes it's other games. Either way, a visual link for those are going to be up on the screen right now, and I will have direct links in the details below. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get into this deck. And our deck today is Budget Dimir Mill. The deck only utilizes 8 rares and no mythics to mill out our opponent, and even that is not even set in stone. Now it is actually possible to make this deck down to 4 rares, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. As always, we'll go in-depth on our deck, we'll discuss first the creatures, then go over the non-creature spells, the land base, the sideboard, spar with Sparky to give you an idea of how to play the deck and how you can win with it, and finally, we will discuss the upgrade path if you want to stick to this deck and want to improve the core. And with that, let's get started with the creatures. Our creature package is actually going to be only 8 cards total, very small, since our mill deck is mostly focused on trying to keep the board in your control and also to, well, mill out, of course. Let's go over our creatures real quick. Merfolk Secret Keeper is a Merfolk Wizard 0/4 for 1 blue mana, and its adventure ability is target player mills 4 cards for 1 blue mana. You're going to put this down probably after you get one of your other spells out, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Put down 4 cards into the yard for your opponent, and also it's a good blocker. That's why we have it. Ruin Crab, 1 mana, crab, 0/3 with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 3 cards. This is the main reason why we're actually doing mill in the first place. Aw, look at this cute little crab. Sorry, I like small cute things like that. Anyways, Ruin Crab is gonna just basically help us get through the mill plan faster and faster. Same thing also, just like the Secret Keeper. It blocks very well. Don't be surprised if your opponent tries to blow this up ASAP. Once they see this down, they already know what your game plan is. You want to basically have a couple counter spells at least in your hand when you drop this down. Hopefully you can keep it protected just long enough to get a couple of landfall triggers off of it. That's it for our creatures. Real simple. Now the spells. Our non-creature spells is where the meat of this deck lies, so let's take it all in. First off, Fatal Push. Destroy target creature if it has a converted mana cost of 2 or less, and the Revolt ability. Destroy target creature if it has a converted mana cost of 4 or less instead if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. You've seen me discuss this card many times. It's great, we have many fetch lands in the deck, so it's really easy to trigger Revolt if you need to. We are focused on milling, but this card is too good not to use for cheap removal. Still, only 2 copies is all we need. Censor, 2 mana at instant speed. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1, and you can cycle it for 1 blue mana. In the early game, you can counter what you need if your opponent is stepping out, but the cycling ability helps us ensure this is still not a dead card. The cycling ability does synergize well with a couple of payoffs that we are going to be utilizing. Speaking of one of those payoffs, Drown Secrets, 2 mana enchantment. Whenever you cast a blue spell, target player mills 2 cards. So this will trigger off all of your cards, with the exception, of course, of Fatal Push, since we are mainly running blue in the deck, so it's one of the rares I feel the deck does need. Some can argue you don't need the card, but we'll discuss that in the upgrade section at the end. Drown in the Lock. For 1 blue and 1 black at instant speed, choose 1. Counter target spell with a converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard, or destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. It scales up very nicely as we mill out our opponent, and being able to be removal or a counterspell is just too sweet to pass up. Tyrant Scorn. 2 mana, 1 black, or 1 blue. Choose 1. Destroy target creature with a converted mana cost of 3 or less, or return target creature to its opponent's hand. Just like our Drown in the Lock, it's flexible in that we are either destroying a creature, or we can bounce a tougher creature to stall out a bit more. Teferi's Tutelage. 3 mana enchantment. When Teferi's Tutelage enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. When you draw a card, target opponent mills 2 cards. Teferi does look a little slow in the deck, but we're looking to get milling going any way possible. So ideally think of it this way. Turn 1, play your crab. Turn 2, Drown Secrets. Turn 3, Teferi's Tutelage. This trio in place rewards us for everything our deck does, drawing cards, casting spells, and playing lands. That is why we will be using it. Didn't say please, Thought Collapse. 3 mana each, instant speed. Both of them say the exact same thing. Counter target spell, its controller mills 3 cards. Use one of either or mix them together if you don't want to spend the wild cards to fill out one playset. Both cards, as I just said, do the exact same thing. It's just more counter spells to protect our plan, and it does synergize with the milling plan. Into the story. 7 mana, instant speed. This spell costs 3 less to cast if an opponent has 7 or more cards in their graveyard. Draw 4 cards. Now, ideally, you're playing this for the 4 mana, which is just so delicious of a deal. I really shouldn't be making videos when I'm hungry. It's our only real card draw in the deck, but it also refuels our hand, and if you can get this to trigger off with Teferi's Tutelage, that is a good 8 cards in your opponent's graveyard. Save this when your hand is running low. And that is basically it for the non-creature spells. Let's talk about lands. As for the lands, we're running a mix of them. 24 lands total, 8 islands, and 4 swamps are the basics. 2 Lonely Sandbar is what we ideally want to cycle for value, but if you need a landfall trigger or just a land period, it does help. Dismal Backwater, while tapped, will be fine. I mean, this is a budget deck after all, but the life gain, small as it is, also doesn't hurt to have. You're going to be stalling out quite a bit in some matches. Just be aware of that. Fable Passage, 2 Evolving Wilds. You can try to get away with using a full set of Evolving Wilds, but the large amount of tap lands will begin to sting after a while. If you feel hesitant to use any rares, I understand, but crafting Fable Passage, I can assure you, wouldn't be a waste. They are used for many other decks, which is why I insist you have to have a whole playset for this deck. That is basically going to be your land package, so now let's cover the sideboard. For your sideboard, this is where things are going to get actually kind of interesting and spicy. We're going to be actually having a small rogue package in the sideboard, so you can pivot your deck if you feel it's being too passive versus your opponent into a more aggressive strategy. Starting with the Merfolk Wind Robber. Merfolk Rogue, 1 mana, 1/1 flying. When the Wind Robber deals combat damage to a player, that player mills a card. You can sacrifice the Merfolk Wind Robber, draw a card. Activate this ability only if your opponent has 8 or more cards in the graveyard. 2 things that help us out. 1, it mills a card. Only 1, but it does help, and it gets in some damage. The sack ability is also relevant if you do have the Teferi's Tutelage out. So, pretty solid. Good to have. We're going to actually jump right now to Sorin Thought Thief since we're talking rogues. Flash Flying, 1/3, Human Rogue. As long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in the graveyard, rogues you control have +1/+0. Whenever one of your more rogues you control attacks, each opponent mills 2 cards. That's why we have a full playset of this and the Wind Robber, so if you do need to pivot into a more aggressive deck, this still helps us out with mill, and the other benefit is they both have a blue mana symbol, so they also trigger off of your Drowned Secrets. It's really going to be match dependent on when you want to sideboard these in. Cling the Dust. Instant speed, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, you gain 3 life, otherwise draw a card. Escape for 4 mana, and exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. This card is going to help you try to snipe out mostly for the Uros and the Croaxes out there. You don't want to try to exile too many cards from your opponent's graveyard because this will be counterproductive to your mill plan using cards such as Drown the Lock. Just be mindful of that when you are utilizing Cling the Dust. 2 extra copies of Fatal Bush just helps us out if we do need to focus more on creature removal. And finally, Cry the Carnarium, a 3 mana sorcery. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Exile all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. If a creature card would die this turn, exile it instead. We're not running too many creatures, as you know, in the deck overall. Even if you bring in things like Sorin Thought Thief or Merfolk Wind Robber, you're really not going to be hurting yourself that much. This is mostly to punish those decks that are trying to go wide with tokens, such as the goblins if you hit them early enough. If you're just trying to just ensure that your opponent can't get in a heavy hit, this can also soften up some creatures. And also, the main reason you want to use this is to get rid of those Cauldron Familiars in the sacrifice decks. But that's basically going to be it for your sideboard. Let's now actually have a sparring match with Sparky to show you how Mill works in this deck. Okay, here we go. Dimir Mill on a budget versus Sparky. Let's see if we can show you how milling is done. All right, so we actually have here ideally what we need. You usually want to at least get the Ruin Crab or the Drowned Secrets, and in this case we actually got both. Merfolk Secret Keeper can double off, which is nice for milling, and 3 lands. Okay, let's go ahead, let's keep this. All right. Island comes down first. The crab. The only awkward part about this draw is our tap lands are going to hold us back just a smidge. Still, it shouldn't be too bad. Dismal Backwater. Normally, you don't want to get too greedy when it comes to situations like this, where we could Merfolk Secret Keeper now and mill, or you can wait a turn and maximize it. This also depends on how your opponent is going to be. We'll just take the damage, just in case Sparky has some kind of crazy plan against us there. I know she probably wouldn't, but still. Dismal Backwater. Gain some life. Mill some cards. No attacks, of course. Crab is meant to just put up a good defense. Okay, so something big we're going to have to worry about soon. Just block that creature for now. Oh, does Sparky actually... Yeah, I figured that. And again, as a warning to you guys, try not to get too greedy with your crabs. Okay, we have another crab. And that does trigger off. Let's put down a Fable Passage. Mill some more. Go ahead, sacrifice your Fable Passage to get another land. Get an island, of course. More milling. Okay, we're at about the halfway point at this rate. And now Drown Secrets kicks in. Lots of milling. We're going to go ahead and mill again. And then one more time. That was a lot of cards, actually, in that turn. Our opponent's now down to 22. All right. Not too shabby. Even with us sponging a hit and losing the Ruin Crab. That Serra Angel is going to be a bit of a problem soon. Fortunately, Merfolk Secret Keeper is also going to be good for blocking here, so we can definitely slow down Sparky a ton. Of course, that Serra Angel is going to be something to worry about. But Drown in the Loch actually is very helpful here, too. So, okay, we got options. Down to 18. Sparky is almost milled out. This is, again, what you want to try to do. The reason why, as a reminder, you're using these blockers is not just for the milling process, but it helps slow you down. Since we are on a budget, you don't have too many options in terms of wraths or anything. So we're going to wait. All right, and depending on how this goes, let's just do it now. We're going to counterspell. Because I want to just finish up the milling as soon as possible here. Destroyed. Sparky's now down to 10 cards. They go swinging. With everything. If you have to block, just use the Secret Keepers first. Try to keep your Ruin Crab alive as long as possible. And Sparky's using their last pump spell. That's fine. All right, down to 12. Ooh, another crab. I mean, he doesn't really help too much here. We can still mill a couple of cards. We're down to 8, though. And we will pass. So we still have a Drown in the Loch. So the only thing we can do with it is we're just going to have to blow up Serra Angels. This is the only thing we cannot block. Since they're out of cards, we can take all these. Block away. Blow up the Angel. 2 more cards milled. Down to 5. And now we have, I guess you could say we've slowed the bleeding down. Okay, here we go. Beautiful. Last one we needed. Mill out the rest of Sparky, and there you go, everyone. That is budget Dimir Mill. You only need less than 10 rares, no mythics, and you could still handle business. All right. Let's talk about how you can upgrade the deck. If you do really like Mill, just be aware that Mill is not going to be considered a competitive style of deck. But if you do like the fun of it, there are some ways you can go. Before you do any of that, of course, as always, and I'm sorry if I say this a million times, please upgrade the mana base first. Get your Watery Graves, get your Drowned Catacombs. Nothing feels worse than having a tap land come in when you need that land untapped for a turn. I'm sure you've seen it many times where you get in that tap land and oh my goodness, you just end up losing right there on the spot. It is frustrating. So definitely do that. Lands first, always. As far as the mill strategy, you have Madding Cacophony and Bruvac the Grand Delinquent. I just love that flavor text it has. Sorry, it just reminds me of an old college professor I had. But in any case, both cards are going to be great if you just want to go full on mill. If you can get them to resolve, especially Bruvac, then you're going to have a ton of cards dumped into your opponent's yard. This is, again, going to be kind of expensive, though. Mainly because this is going to cost you some mythics and some rares. So only consider this if you really want to go all in on mill. If you're looking for a more conventional way of running this style of deck, you're going to be looking at more of a aggro/control package, kind of what you see right now in the Dimir Rogues that are currently running in Standard. So as you've probably already seen, Thieves Guild Enforcers, where that comes in, you've seen this card a couple times. It has flash. It comes in. It helps mill your opponent out for 2 cards. And as long as there are 8 or more cards in the graveyard, Thieves Guild Enforcer gets +2/+1 and has Death Touch. So basically it becomes a 3/2. This is going to be if you're going to go with the Rogues package, which is going to be more focused on the aggro and mill plan. If you want to go more control, you're just going to have to look at more of the wraths out there. Ritual Soot, Languish, and Extinction Event. Mostly because you're going to be sticking to a mill plan, you probably don't want to use Extinction Event, but there are going to be some circumstances where maybe a single copy in the sideboard can help you out. Languish and Ritual Set are more likely what you're going to be seeing in case if you really just want to get cards in the yard to help trigger off things like Thieves Guild Enforcer or other cards that benefit from that, like Into the Story. Finally, I'm going to bring up Drown Secrets one more time here. Some people have, again, as I mentioned earlier in the video, argue that you don't need this for a mill deck. If you have copies, go ahead and I highly recommend to use them. If you don't want to craft them, I'm actually not going to force you to, and I know that's contradictory to how I designed this deck, but the main reason is crafting this with wildcards may not be towards your advantage, and those rare wildcards might be better off used for something more conventional such as the land base. So this is going to be something that's up to you depending on how you want to run this deck. That's my only one that I would say if you really want to be cheap on the rares, or if you don't feel like it's going to be worth to craft this when you could use it from something more conventional and flexible, that's up to you guys. And that is budget Dimir Mill, everyone. So, you tell me, what do you think? Do you like alt win conditions and annoying your opponent? If so, consider this deck. Now, I know Mill isn't the most exciting way to play Magic, but come on. When was the next time you're going to say you had fun tossing out cardboard? Those pile of Amazon boxes in your living room you forgot to dump out into the recycle bin? Seriously, don't let those pile up. So, thanks again for watching, guys. Be sure to like and subscribe if I helped you out, or at least entertained you. And until next time, when in doubt, jank 'em out. Later.